your eyes and breathe. The winds have quieted. The stars lean in. The world grows still, as if it, too, is listening. For what you're about to hear is not just a story. It is a journey, a tale woven through time, carved into the bones of the earth, and whispered through the leaves by the spirits of those who came before. This is the path of a warrior, born in fire, shaped by shadows, and redeemed by love. Her name is Xena, the warrior princess, and though her footsteps may no longer echo across the land, her legacy endures, in story, in soul, in every heart that dares to believe in second chances. So come, let us begin the journey together. In the age before memory, before parchment bore ink and time had a name, the world pulsed with myth. Mountains cracked with the weight of titans. Storms howled the names of forgotten gods. The very air shimmered with the breath of divinity and terror. This was not a world of men, but of monsters and miracles. Zeus reigned from Olympus, hurling thunder as judgment. Hera's jealousy could unmake empires. Poseidon stirred oceans with a thought, and Artemis danced under moonlight, hunting with a silence that chilled the spine. To be mortal, then, was to be a plaything, to live at the mercy of immortal whims. Kings were crowned not by lineage, but by omen. Kingdoms rose like smoke and fell like whispers. The stars themselves were said to speak. Seers held power rivaling swords. Yet behind every legend, etched in marble, there breathed a tale still untold. One wrapped not in prophecy, but in blood. From Amphipolis she came, a village too stubborn to bow, too small to be spared. Among its fields and taverns was born a child with no divine heralds, no heavenly markings, only fire in her lungs and fury in her veins. Her name was Xena. She did not inherit destiny, she seized it. She was not born with greatness. She carved it from the bones of those who stood in her path. Where others dreamed of peace, she mastered the dance of war. She was not the chosen of the gods. She was their challenger. She was a sister, a daughter, a storm waiting to break. This is not a tale sung in courts or carved in scrolls. This is the truth beneath the myth. The rise of a warrior who dared to face gods, not in reverence, but in defiance. The journey of a soul forged in shadow and bound for light. For in every age, there are those who bow, and those who rise. Xena was not born of legend. She came into the world beneath a thatched roof. Her mother, Cyrene, a tavern keeper. Her father, a name lost to time. No scroll sang of her infancy. No star marked her crib. Yet in the silence of that ordinary life, a storm brewed. She was a fierce child, not wild, purposeful. While others laughed at play, she trained her body, tested her strength, listened to stories of war from weathered travelers with eyes like iron. Her fists knew defiance before her voice learned diplomacy. She was a girl formed not by prophecy, but by necessity. Her mother tried to temper the fire, but Xena was unyielding. She fought boys twice her size and returned home bloodied but undefeated. A stubborn spark lit in her every time someone said she couldn't. She didn't play, she practiced. She didn't dream, she prepared. She had brothers, but none like Lycius. He was her shield, her compass, her tether to kindness. Together, they dreamt of defending Amphipolis, their quiet home caught in the crosshairs of merciless warlords. And when those warlords came, Lycius died. He died defending what they loved. And with him, the girl vanished. In her place stood Fury. Xena, not yet the warrior princess, rallied the frightened, the broken, the angry. She taught them to fight, to stand, to kill. The warlord who brought death to her doorstep was destroyed. But in the ashes of that battle, Xena discovered something darker than vengeance. Power. She marched beyond Amphipolis, first as protector, then as conqueror. One village became 10. 10 became a kingdom. Her enemies spoke her name in fear. The woman who once bled for peace now soaked the earth in war. But power is a hungry flame. It does not rest, and it does not forgive. Her cruelty grew. Her cause blurred. Cities burned. Children wept. Still she pressed forward, armored not just in leather and steel, but in denial. The whispers of her past trailed her, always just beyond reach. She looked in the mirror and no longer saw a protector, but a tyrant in mourning. She became a storm on horseback, her chakram slicing through sunlight. Her armor gleamed not with honor, but with the spoils of conquest. She broke kings and burned scrolls of peace. She laughed in the face of ambassadors, mocked the weak, and made generals kneel. Then came Caesar, a Roman general, a strategist, a seducer. She saw in him an equal and a partner. They shared ambition, they shared skin. But where Xena offered loyalty, Caesar offered chains. He betrayed her, crucified her, left her to rot on a cross, a trophy of his triumph. She should have died, but she didn't. And when she lived, truly lived, she found that something inside her had changed. Not her body, not her skill, her soul. It ached. For the first time, she felt the weight of every city razed, every family shattered. She returned not as a queen of war, but a ghost of regret. She retraced her steps, past battlefields, burned towns, mass graves that bore her name in silence. She spoke to no one. She listened to everything. The world did not welcome her. She wasn't hailed as a hero, but she wasn't hunted either. People watched her pass in silence, unsure whether to fear her return or mourn the woman she had been. And so, the warlord wandered. Her sword still hung by her side, but no longer as a banner of glory. It was a burden, a reminder. Each night she dreamed of Lycius, of fire, of chains, of choices made in rage. She woke with her fists clenched and her heart hollow. And though she didn't know it yet, her road to redemption had already begun. It began not with forgiveness, but with grief. It began with silence. In the wake of Caesar's betrayal, Xena did not retreat. She evolved. What died on that cross was not her ambition, but her illusion of partnership. From the ashes of shattered trust, the conqueror rose, forged in fire and grief. Her eyes, once filled with curiosity and warmth, hardened into cold steel. Her voice, once a blend of passion and empathy, became a commandment of war. She no longer sought warriors. She gathered predators, mercenaries who laughed in the face of law, assassins who drank in silence. Her legions swelled with men and women who followed not for loyalty, but for fear and bloodlust. She draped herself in darkness, black leather and burnished bronze, armor that gleamed like oil beneath the sun. Her chakram, once a marvel of precision and discipline, now cut through the air with the ruthlessness of judgment. Where once it disarmed, now it decapitated. Her rise became unstoppable. She crushed uprisings in Gaul, dismantled tribes in Britannia, and turned pirate kings into kindling across the Aegean. Spartan hoplites fell to her tactics. Persian scouts vanished beneath her ambushes. She challenged Rome not with words, but with slaughter. And people whispered. They whispered her name like a curse passed down to children to keep them in line. Xena, the destroyer of nations. A name to shudder at. A name to never invoke at sea or in the dead of night. But in all the noise, The screams, the clash of swords, the crackle of fire. She could still hear the silence of Lycius, the silence of Amphipolis, the silence of everything she had lost. It echoed in her dreams, in moments between battles, in the hush after victory, and it grew louder the more blood she spilled. She tried to erase it, to bury it in conquest. She ordered cities to the ground and turned temples into rubble. She defaced the gods themselves, daring them to strike her down. And still, the silence endured. Then came the faces, not enemies, not kings, simple people. A mother shielding her child, a farmer clutching a dull blade, a boy no older than Lycius, standing his ground against her army. Their defiance pierced her more than any spear. Their humanity haunted her more than Caesar ever could. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the storm inside her began to shift. She paused before the next invasion. She hesitated at the next execution. Not because she feared defeat, but because, buried deep beneath the scars and steel, something in her remembered. The face of her brother, the voice of her mother, the feel of soil from Amphipolis beneath her feet. Not all enemies screamed. Some simply asked, why? And for the first time in years, Xena had no answer. In that silence, the woman stirred. After the cross, there was only pain, raw, bone-deep, unrelenting. Xena's body had survived the crucifixion, but her soul had fractured. Left to hang under a foreign sky with salt in her wounds and betrayal in her blood, she didn't pray to the gods. She didn't scream. She simply stared upward, as if daring the heavens to justify what had become of her. The days that followed were blurred in agony and silence. Her body burned with infection. Her dreams flickered with memories. Lycius, Amphipolis, the firelight on her mother's face. When she awoke, there was no triumph, only stillness. The conqueror had not died, but she had been changed. She was rescued, but not by allies. Strangers found her, barely alive, and nursed her back not out of loyalty, but pity. She did not thank them. She could not. Her voice, once a command, was hoarse from disuse and despair. She left them behind without a word, slipped into the woods like a ghost. Gone was the thunder of war horses, the chorus of marching feet. Xena walked alone. Her armor rusted, her sword dulled. She traded her crimson standard for a threadbare cloak, her war banners for the hush of dew-soaked mornings. She wandered through places she once scorched, fields that had burned now bloomed, rivers she'd clogged with bodies now ran clear. And the people, oh, the people, they did not hail her, they did not forgive, they stared, some with hatred, some with terror, some, the oldest, with sorrow. And in that sorrow, she began to see herself. She helped where she could, silently, without asking, without staying. She dug irrigation trenches, repaired broken wheels, fought off bandits in the dark, then vanished before the village awoke. She wasn't seeking redemption. She was seeking silence that didn't scream. Her nights were filled with dreams, of chains and laughter, of Caesar's smile, of Lycius's eyes the day he died. But sometimes, rarely, she dreamed of peace, of a world without conquest, of a young girl laying down her sword. In a village plagued by slavers, she found herself cornered between choice and instinct. Her blade, so long dormant, moved again. But this time, every motion was defensive, precise, deliberate. She freed the captives, not for glory, not for revenge, for no reason she could explain. And among the rescued stood a girl with red gold hair and eyes too bright for a world this dark. A girl who did not flinch at the sight of her, who did not cower, who did not hate. Gabrielle. She spoke like a bard, laughed like a stream in spring, and believed in goodness like it was armor. She followed Xena, not to be protected, but to bear witness. She asked questions others dared not. She told stories that didn't end in blood. And in Gabrielle's presence, Xena felt something long lost. Not safety, not forgiveness. Hope. Hope that maybe the weight she bore wasn't eternal. That perhaps even the blackest soul could bend toward light. This was not redemption. Not yet. But it was the beginning. And beginnings, Xena had learned, were sacred. Gabrielle entered Xena's life like dawn breaks after an endless night, slowly, softly, and then all at once. The young bard from Potidea was no warrior. She carried no sword, bore no scars. Her weapons were her words, her courage, her boundless imagination, and her unshakable belief in a world where even the darkest soul could find light. Xena had saved her from slavers, but in truth, it was Gabrielle who began to save Xena, day by day, step by step, with stories, with empathy, with patience. She didn't demand change, she inspired it. Gabrielle asked questions that made Xena pause, not because they were confrontational, but because they were curious, pure. She wanted to understand why the world was cruel, and more importantly, why Xena still carried so much of that cruelty in her shadow. Around campfires beneath starlit skies, Gabrielle spun tales not of glory, but of grace. Her words painted worlds of kindness and valor, not through might, but through heart. And in those moments, Xena listened. At first, the warrior thought she could shake the girl. She chose perilous routes, tangled with warlords, fought merciless enemies, hoping Gabrielle would choose an easier road, would decide to stay behind. But the bard never left. She walked through blood-soaked battlefields with trembling legs, but unwavering resolve. She faced monsters that towered over her, gods that sneered at her, and though her voice sometimes quivered, it never failed. Gabrielle didn't see the warlord. She saw the woman, the pain beneath the armor, the wounds no blade had caused, and she stayed. In return, Xena began to soften, not her strength, but her silence. The sharp edges she used to keep the world at bay dulled in Gabrielle's presence. She began to share stories, almost shyly at first. Memories of Lycius, of sun-drenched afternoons in Amphipolis, of her mother's bread baking in the hearth. Stories of laughter, of life before the rage. Gabrielle never pried. She simply listened, her green eyes wide and soft. And when Xena ran out of words, Gabrielle filled the silence with music, with tales of imagined lands, with laughter that cracked the walls Xena had built around her soul. Together, they traveled, not as soldier and follower, but as companions, as equals. They defended helpless villagers, brought tyrants to justice, stood firm against armies, and comforted the grieving. Each step they took side by side stitched something torn in Xena's heart. Each word Gabrielle spoke sowed another seed. Xena began to laugh again. Not often, not loudly, but enough that Gabrielle noticed. Enough that it mattered. The bond between them grew unspoken, deeper than words. When Gabrielle laughed, Xena felt warmth where once there was only frost. When Gabrielle cried, Xena felt rage at the world's cruelty and her own role in it. And when Gabrielle was wounded, when her life hung by a thread, Xena felt terror. Not for the loss of a companion, but for the loss of her soul's light. They faced betrayal together, faced loss, faced one another when anger and grief created rifts, but always, they returned. The path was never smooth, but it was shared. Gabrielle taught Xena that redemption was not a prize won through battle. It was earned in kindness, in choosing the harder path, in forgiveness of others and of oneself. And in Gabriel, Xena found not just hope, not just friendship. She found home. Their journey did not go unnoticed by the heavens. In an era where gods still walked among mortals, capricious, jealous, and driven by whims as deadly as storms, two women walking the path of redemption stood out like twin flames in the night. Xena and Gabriel were no longer merely warriors and wanderers. They were disruptors of divine balance, thorns in the side of prophecy. Ares, the god of war, refused to release his claim. He had shaped Xena once, molded her rage, whispered into her ambition, lit the fires of her earliest conquests. He had seen her not as a mortal, but as a weapon forged for his glory. Now, watching her slip beyond his grasp, he raged. He appeared in her dreams, his voice a siren's song of power. In firelit glades, in reflections of blood, he offered her the world again, if only she would return. His offers were tempting in form, but empty in soul. Xena wanted no throne. She had no need for empires. She longed for stillness, for meaning, for the quiet that came not from conquest, but from connection. Gabriel was the anchor. Her presence reminded Xena of who she had become, and who she still could be. Where once there was wrath, now there was resolve. Where once there was carnage, now there was conscience. Together, they balanced each other. Gabriel with her boundless faith, and Xena with the tempered steel of experience. But no balance can remain untouched forever. In the east, in the halls of Delphi, in temples hidden from time, prophecies stirred. Oracles whispered of a child, born of twilight, born of conflict, who would herald the end of the Olympian age. This child, they said, would walk the line between mortal and divine, and bring about a reckoning unlike any before. The gods grew uneasy. The name of the child echoed in their dreams. Evening, and from Xena she would come. The birth of Eve fractured the divine order. The Olympians saw her as an existential threat. Athena sharpened her blades. Poseidon called storms from the depths. Hephaestus stoked fires in his forge to craft weapons meant to end bloodlines. The heavens thundered, but the earth did not bend. Xena and Gabriel stood firm. They shielded the child, fought impossible odds, faced armies not of men, but of myth. They wandered not as fugitives, but as guardians of the future. The gods struck again and again, but they underestimated the strength of mortal love. Eve grew not in temples, but under stars. Her laughter mingled with fireflies. Her first steps were watched by a warrior and a bard, women who had slain monsters and survived crucifixions, who carried her not as a symbol, but as a daughter. But Xena's doubts never slept. Could one born of her blood, her sins, walk a path of peace? Could she raise a child without passing on the weight of her own darkness? These were questions Gabriel never tried to answer. Instead, she remained present, holding Xena when the nightmares returned, singing to Eve when the storms gathered, and reminding them both that destiny was not a chain, but a choice. Xena's war had evolved. It was no longer waged with armies or drawn blades. It was a war against legacy, against the belief that fate could not be rewritten, against the gods themselves, who ruled not with love, but with fear. And in every battle, mortal and divine, Xena and Gabriel did not just endure. They defied. They changed the course of myth. And in doing so, they proved that even in a world ruled by gods, the greatest power lay in the hearts of those who dared to love and protect what mattered most. Even the strongest bonds are tested in fire. The years had forged an alliance between Xena and Gabriel that felt unbreakable, forged in the crucible of war, tempered in shared victories, and sanctified in the quiet moments beneath starlit skies. Together, they had stood against tyrants, gods, and their own demons. But the next trial came not with a roar, but with a whisper, and it would be the most devastating of all. It began with a prophecy veiled in shadows, and a god whose name was spoken in hushed dread. Dahak. This ancient, malevolent force sought a vessel in the world of mortals, and through cruel manipulation, he found one in Gabriel. The bard, ever filled with compassion and belief in the goodness of life, was ensnared by deceit, and through her, hope was born. Hope, a name that should have signified new beginnings. Instead, it became a curse. She was not a child in the way Eve had been. No mortal softness tempered her. She was an echo of her father's darkness, born with the cunning of the divine and the malice of the damned. Her smile was cold, her eyes void. And yet, Gabriel, blinded by love and guilt, tried to nurture what could not be tamed. Xena sensed it, the tremor beneath the earth, the omen in every breath hope drew. She tried to reason with Gabriel, to awaken her to the danger. But Gabriel's heart, so used to mending wounds, could not see that some wounds bleed poison. And then came the hour of reckoning. Hope, now grown and sharpened like a dagger, fulfilled her dark purpose. She took from Xena the one pure thing she had left, her son, Solon, a boy hidden away from the war, from the blood, from the woman Xena had once been, a child untouched by her sins, but not untouched by fate. Hope murdered him in silence, and in that moment, the world shattered. Death did not end their journey. It merely changed the path. From the ash of heartbreak and the dust of shattered belief, Xena and Gabriel walked forward, not into clarity, but into mystery. Their travels led them far from Greece, far from Olympus, into the realms where stories bled into spirit, to Chin, to India, to Eleusia. In Chin, they encountered more than a new land. It was a realm steeped in ancestral honor and ancient retribution. There, among silken banners and shadowed halls, Xena confronted not only rulers, but the ghost of her own wrath. The green dragon, Laumar's son, stood as judge, jury, and mirror. He forced Xena to reckon with the life she had stolen and the compassion she had buried. Her blades were sharp, but not sharper than the truth. Gabriel, by her side, learned that peace was not simply silence. It was effort, courage, restraint. The two women grew in opposite ways, Xena through humility, Gabriel through strength. And through the crucible of Chin, they emerged changed, not diminished, but refined. India was a tapestry of sound and color, faith and paradox. Here the spiritual world pressed closer. They met sages who saw beyond skin, who spoke not in commands but in questions. What is karma? What binds the soul? What releases it? Xena and Gabriel found themselves in battles no sword could win, battles for their spirits. Temptation came cloaked in kindness. Illusion wore familiar faces. Evil whispered through false salvation. In these sacred lands, they found that guilt could not be outrun, that redemption was not a single act, but a cycle, lived and relived until peace found root. Gabriel wrestled with pacifism, with the limits of words in a world bent on blood. Xena feared becoming, once again, the monster the world remembered. Together, they faced Indrajit, a demon prince born of ego and chaos. His illusions bent time, twisted reality. He separated them, not just in body, but in soul. And yet, even in darkness, they called to each other. That call, that tether, shattered the illusion. Their love was not an escape. It was a truth. Then came Eleusia, a realm untethered from time and reason, a theater of the subconscious, where every regret became a lyric and every memory a stage. Their weapons were song, their wounds the script. In Illusia, they met avatars of their past: Solon, Hope, Callisto. Each name a scar, each face a trial. But Illusia was not meant to punish. It was meant to reveal. They saw themselves not as the world saw them, warrior and bard, but as broken beings yearning to heal. In that musical limbo, they forgave each other, truly, fully, without condition. Forgiveness became harmony, harmony became light, and from that light, they emerged, not reborn, but reawakened. When they returned to the waking world, the sun felt warmer. The weight they carried was still present, but it no longer crushed. They had found something greater than absolution. They had found continuity. In each step forward, they walked not as fugitives of the past, but as pilgrims of the eternal. Their bond no longer needed explanation. It was woven into the fabric of what they were. Not lovers, not just friends, but twin flames across lifetimes, drawn again and again to the same truth: that redemption is not only possible, it is destined. Flesh could fail, the gods could fall, but soul was everlasting. Xena's scream tore through the night like the cry of a dying star. It was not just pain, it was annihilation, the destruction of every hope she had clung to. The boy was gone, and Gabriel, by blood and by choice, had allowed the nightmare to take root. The betrayal was more than personal. It was mythic, a rift forged not by hatred, but by devastation. Xena could not forgive. Gabriel could not atone. They stood apart, warriors made voiceless by grief. Days passed, then weeks. Seasons turned. They crossed lands apart, each carrying a silence heavy as stone. Gabrielle wept in solitude, not only for her daughter, but for the trust she had broken. Xena fought battles with the rage of 1,000 storms, but none could touch the fury that burned within. And yet, destiny is not linear. It bends, it loops, it waits. Their paths crossed again, not by chance, but by the weave of the fates. In Chin, they stood among emperors and goats. In India, they faced the illusion of God and the test of karma. In Illusia, a place beyond sight and reason, their souls sang the truth. There, amid dreams and hymns, they found one another again. Not as they had been, but as they had become. Broken, but reaching. Scarred, but still sacred. Because in the deepest grief lies the seed of grace. And love, true love, does not vanish in loss. It changes form. It becomes quieter, more resilient, like an ember in the snow. Together, they would rise once more. Not to erase the pain, but to carry it together. Because redemption, like love, is never truly lost, only buried. And Xena and Gabriel, warriors of flesh, spirit, and myth, would dig it up again, hand in hand, tear by tear, until they could breathe again. The gods had ruled for centuries, immortal, unchallenged, and unquestioned. They shaped the tides, stirred the winds, and dictated the fate of kings and beggars alike. But in the footsteps of two mortal women, Olympus began to tremble. Eve was born not just from Xena's flesh, but from prophecy, a child of light and war, a harbinger of the twilight. The Olympians saw her not as a child, but as a threat, a storm brewing beneath mortal skin. They could not allow such a prophecy to come to pass. Athena, ever cunning, Hephaestus, ever crafting, Poseidon, ever wrathful. Together, they conspired. The order of the gods would fall, unless Xena fell first. They struck with fury. Divine armies marched. Waves devoured coastlines. Volcanoes rumbled. Xena and Gabriel became fugitives in their own myth, carrying Eve, protecting her from forces both divine and monstrous. And then, silence. A deep magic sealed them away. 25 years passed. When they awoke, the world had changed. Olympus had grown darker, more desperate, and Eve, no longer a babe, had become the messenger of Eli, a pacifist, a symbol, a new faith that threatened the very foundation of Olympus. So the gods descended. One by one, Xena rose to meet them. With Gabriel at her side, they faced Athena's legions, Poseidon's tides, Hephaestus's infernos. Each battle was a reckoning, not just of power, but of purpose. The gods had long forgotten compassion. They ruled through fear, through vengeance, and they fell. The sea was calm, the sun warm upon the deck as Gabriel sailed into the unknown. She held the chakram close, not as a weapon, but as a memory, as a promise. Xena was gone, yet never truly absent. Her spirit lived in every act of courage Gabriel now performed, in every injustice she challenged, in every story she shared around flickering fires. Gabriel had become more than a bard, more than a companion. She was now the torchbearer, and she burned bright. The world still needed saving, one village at a time, one heart at a time. So she traveled, not seeking war, but peace. She became mentor, protector, legend. People whispered her name alongside Xena's, as if the two were still riding side by side. Because in spirit, they were. When Gabriel raised the chakram in battle, the wind seemed to sing. When she healed, her hands carried warmth not only of her own making, but of a legacy etched in sacrifice. Xena's tale did not end with death. It lived on, in every soul Gabriel saved, in every story passed down, in every act of redemption, inspired by a warrior who once walked a blood-stained path and chose the light. So the legacy lived, and would live forever, not because Xena was stronger, but because she had something they had lost: love, loyalty, and a cause worth dying for. In the end, only Ares and Aphrodite remained, stripped of divinity, mortal, broken. And so Olympus crumbled, not in a cataclysm, but in a whisper. The wind carried the scent of cherry blossoms as Xena and Gabriel sailed to Joppa, a land distant not only in geography, but in spirit. There, in the whispering bamboo groves and crimson-swept temples, they encountered not gods of Olympus, but spirits. Spirits with unfinished songs. Spirits crying out for justice. Joppa was beautiful, breathtaking in its stillness, its honor, its pain. But beneath that surface, shadows lingered. The ghosts of 1,000 wrongs walked beneath the moonlight. Among them, a city, once glorious, now cursed. Long ago, Xena had brought fire to that city. Vengeance had clouded her heart. She had believed herself a harbinger of justice, a sword for the wronged. But in her fury, she had lit a pyre that consumed 40,000 souls. Their cries never faded, and now they called her back. Akemi, graceful, mysterious, spoke of a way to bring peace to the restless dead, a final sacrifice, a warrior's redemption, not by killing, but by dying. The ghosts would only rest if Xena's spirit joined them willingly, balanced the scale with her own. Gabriel wept, pleaded, fought, but Xena knew this was not a punishment. It was a purpose, a closing of the circle. A warrior forged in fire, reforged in love, would now offer herself to silence the screams she once caused. She went to battle, knowing she would not return. She fought with the fury of a woman who had nothing left to prove. When she fell, it was not in defeat. It was in deliverance. Her spirit lingered just long enough. Gabrielle held the ashes in trembling hands, whispering promises to the sea. She would carry the legacy, not with vengeance, but with vision, with stories, with courage. The chakram was passed. The ship sailed. And Xena, once a scourge then a savior, faded into legend.